And we're live. No countdown timer today. I forgot it. How's everyone doing? Uh, Tricky situation on the land. I'm still here out in Venice, California, but Tal, who's living in Israel, is following closely everything going on. So the focus of today's live stream is to kind of just give updates, commentary, and analysis of the situation, the current state of the situation, and what could potentially be done to de-escalate. So with that, I will give it to you, Tal. And those in the chat, let us know where you're viewing from.
Yeah, so as we've seen, there's been a lot going on in the news in the past few days. A lot of different news sites and politicians. I think they've been focusing on one or two events. Either Israeli politicians are focusing on how the world is reacting to different events going on the ground. Palestinians are reacting to things that are unfolding in the Al-Aqsa compound and also within the West Bank. A lot of things unfolding at once. We saw how the protests against the current government are still ongoing. However, they seem to have gone down in their strength and also the numbers. So that's a change that has occurred. Ben Gvir is currently in the process of getting his own National Guard, which will be directly under his ministry's control. This private, essentially National Guard, from what I've understood, their essential point is that they will deal with different types of crimes that the Israeli police shouldn't be dealing with. For example, weapon theft, different gangs in the south, and other things that are within proper Israel and sometimes in the West Bank. Now, a few things unfolded in the past few days, and it's very, very hard to summarize them because most of my sources are either from different individuals who are in the IDF or Palestinian militant channels. And so each of them have a specific narrative in which they're going to be presenting things that have occurred. So it's very hard to get the full picture. And so I can only piece together what I see. What occurred on the night of Passover, the first night of Passover, which is one of the holy holidays in Judaism. So there's a Seder night where it's a very, very holy time in Judaism. And at the Al-Aqsa compound, which sits atop the Temple Mount and essentially in the center of the old city, there was a lot of videos and photos of what could be summed up as police brutality and also different rioters firing fireworks, throwing rocks, and hitting each other with batons. And it's very, very messy, in my opinion, to understand what actually occurred there, because I wasn't there on the ground, and there's also not raw video footage of the events. It's usually people start filming a horrific event only when it's in the middle of it happening, because you're not going to start filming before it happens. So it's very hard to know how things unfolded. But it seems that usually during times when it's Ramadan, which is a holy month of fasting in Islam, there tends to be a lot more frustration around Al-Aqsa. So Israel, which currently controls the Temple Mount, under the Waqf, the Jordanian, under Jordan, which actually controls what happens on the Waqf, there's a lot of different restrictions. One of the restrictions that Israel imposed on the Temple Mount, I don't know what the security reason for this is, or if it's simply imposed for other reasons. Now, so I'm not going to get into why that is, but one of the restrictions is that you can't be praying on the Temple Mount or in the mosques there after a certain time. Now, one of the Muslim prayers is very, very late in the evening. I'm not exactly sure the time or the actual name of the prayer itself. Someone probably in the comments could say. And so what it seemed that a lot of different Muslim worshippers were doing is they were protesting this by barricading themselves inside the Al-Aqsa mosque and also within areas of the compound itself. And so they knew that the Israeli police were going to be coming in to forcibly remove them. So that's probably why they brought in all these different types of weaponry, fireworks, rocks and stuff like that to essentially fight off the Israeli control that was going to try to disperse them, because Justin speaks Tarawiya, probably butchered the name, but as in the comments. And so what unfolded there was kind of this chaotic scene where the Israeli police are trying to remove these people from the mosque after the hours that they're not supposed there. And Palestinians that were in the mosque at the time, they, whether or not it's large groups or certain, we know that there are different militant groups that have supporters that are a part of these protests, but it's hard to, I'm not going to give a definitive answer of how many are actually a part of militant groups or how many of them are spontaneous supporters of fighting against the Israeli police. But they started fighting against the Israeli police and refused to be removed. And then that essentially leads to really, really bad situations where you have a lot of abuse, both from the rioters that were attacking the police and also from police officers that were, as I saw one video where they were taking one of their guns and beating one of the people that were on the ground. And so it leads to a really, really bad situation. Now, Al-Aqsa has always been of a point of contention in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. One of the most famous historic examples is the 1928 or 29 Hebron massacre. I think 1929 Hebron massacre, which was spurred because there was rumors of Jews trying to take over the Al-Aqsa mosque during that time period, and it led to spontaneous riots amongst Arabs that were living in the British Mandate. And that led to massacres against Jews in Hebron and other areas, but specifically Hebron had a very, very horrific massacre against the Jewish population there. And from then on, up until today, it's always been a point of contention, the Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's one of the reasons that led to the Second Intifada. In May 2021, that led to an operation that also was due to contentions that had to do with Al-Aqsa. So Al-Aqsa is always a contention point. Now, this seems to have been what led to the rocket fire from Gaza and also from Lebanon. Now, it's important to note that while the rocket fire from Lebanon was from the territories controlled by Hezbollah, which is a paramilitary group that receives direct funding from Iran, they essentially control southern Lebanon. De facto, this is their words, not mine. So it's obvious that you're not able to, in my opinion, bring in 34 rockets without Hezbollah being aware of the fact that you're going to be firing them. But Hezbollah was not directly responsible for the firing of the rockets. From what I've seen, it was the Al-Aqsa brigades, which is an armed wing of Hamas. And so they were trying to fire against Israel from two different fronts, both from Lebanon and both from Gaza. Israel responded by bombing specific training sites, empty outposts. No casualties were, no militants, no civilians, nothing. And it seems that, so it looks like Israel went for a very minimal response, in my opinion, by, especially with this type of right-wing government that talked about before when it was in the opposition, that it was going to have a much more forceful take against Hamas and Hezbollah. This response to these scenes from northern Israel of these rocket barrages is unprecedented. It hasn't been this bad since 2006. There were a few rockets a few years ago, but nothing of 34 rockets being fired into Israel at once, and also mortar fire. And so it seems that they wanted to go for a much calmer approach. Why that is, I don't really know, and I don't really know enough about that region to give a intelligent response. What's going on in the West Bank is a little bit more troublesome for the stability of the region in terms of the West Bank and proper Israel. So we've been seeing in the last few months that the Israeli army has had a lot more operations in the West Bank. Almost every single night, we're seeing more and more operations. It started with the attacks that occurred within Tel Aviv and Bnei Brak, where different assailants, both from Jenin, went into Tel Aviv and Bnei Brak and killed multiple civilians. Israel then started going into Jenin to try to disarm these different groups, and that led to a much more powerful resistance. Palestinian militant groups taking hold in these cities. Now, reading through these Palestinian resistance groups, Telegram channels, their official posts, what the leaders are saying, they're essentially, what I've understood, what they want to do is that every single time the IDF tries to come into these territories to either confiscate illegal weapons, to arrest potential individuals who are from armed groups, or potentially going to commit a terror attack as in trying to commit attacks against civilian targets, and that they want that every time the IDF enters these areas, they're going to have to suffer casualties. They are going to not be able to simply come in, take what they want, and leave. And so every single time the IDF goes into these different cities within territory A and B, they are attacked by gunfire from all sides. For example, if you go, whenever the IDF goes into Jenin, there is a alarm, that siren that goes off in the entire village and alerts all the fighters in the city to come and attack the IDF soldiers. There's Telegram groups where they essentially collect intelligence on the movements of IDF soldiers inside of the cities, where they are, exactly their locations, so militants can come and attack them in these areas. And this has been growing. There's more and more militant groups that have been showing up in the past few months, much better funded, armed. There's a growing opposition to the Palestinian Authority. I think it was a week or two ago, during a parade for one of the fighters that was killed, they fired a barrage of bullets on the Palestinian Authority's compound. Much more of the Palestinian Authority is essentially losing control of a lot of main areas. And in my perspective, my own analysis, what I think they're trying to do is they want to slowly take control of certain cities, and then also the access points between them. Recently, they had an operation, which they tell you exactly what the operation was called. It was called Let the Checkpoints Fall campaign. This campaign was set off by one of the militant groups in the West Bank a few days ago. And every single night, there's been multiple attacks. They've been firing, they've had groups of individuals firing barrages of bullets on cars, civilian cars, with Israeli license plates. They've been firing at IDF checkpoints. They've been firing on IDF military bases, settlements within the West Bank. And essentially every single night, more and more and more chaos, trying to exalt a type of revenge for every single time the IDF tries to do anything within the West Bank. And in my opinion, this is my own perspective, that I think that this could eventually lead to another operation similar to what we saw in 2002, where the IDF went in and brought in tanks, armory, and essentially destroyed a lot of these different areas. Because at the moment, I think the IDF is losing a lot of its control in these different areas and its deterrence. Because almost every few days now, we're seeing militant groups growing in their courage and strength to actually commit attacks against Israeli civilian and military targets, and not face repercussions, either due to, for example, simply destroying the house of an individual that carried out an attack against civilians or military officers, or closing down a town for a few days as a form of collecting punishment, doesn't really deter these individuals. If anything, it gives them more and more and more support. So I think that we could be seeing in the next few weeks, if this government is able to stay stable and not fall apart for other reasons that we talked about in a previous live stream, there's a good chance that we could be seeing Israel go for a full-scale operation in the West Bank, which involves Apaches, tanks, armored personnel carriers, which would be a major escalation in the West Bank. So that's currently what's going on.
Cool, Tal. Thank you. If anybody has questions, now would be the time to ask. I think maybe we could also just turn this into a call-in show. If anybody wants to hop on, we could drop a link, get some community commentary. We'll also take a few minutes to share a new project we're working on. Tal, you want to give the rundown on 100 Voices?
Yeah, so Adar and I and others are currently in charge of a project called the 100 Voices Project. And so we see a lot of the time that the individuals who are asked what they think about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or how daily life here affects their lives is usually asked to politicians or very, very well-known activists, people who know what to say, people who already have a script, whether that's a fictional script or an actual one in front of them. And the idea of 100 Voices is to ask normal, everyday people what concerns them and how do these things affect them in their day-to-day life. And Adar will go into a little bit more. I'm in charge of the administration. I'm in charge of actually setting people up for interviews. Adar is going to be doing interviews, and we're also going to be looking for an individual to also do interviews in Arabic as well. So it doesn't matter if you speak only English, only Hebrew, or only Arabic. You're welcome to come. Any views are welcome, of course. Anything is welcome for the channel and for 100 Voices. A link is in the description of this live stream. In a few minutes, I'll also put it in the chat, and feel free to sign up, and I'll get in touch with you.
Cool. Yeah, I don't have much to add. Pretty much, it's just one way to look at it is a data collection effort, right? It's like, how do we know what the people want? How do we really understand the inhabitants of their land, their true fears, concerns, hopes, and aspirations? They're rarely asked, not on the Israeli side, not on the Palestinian side. So the whole idea is to really go deep in these interviews and understand the core of somebody's beliefs and how strongly they hold these beliefs, and based on collecting that data, proposing a solution to the conflict. So it's a new approach to conflict resolution that we're super excited to be involved in. Cool. I see we have Justin joins. So I see Sapphire Zeep says, sounds like a project Corey Schuster could assist in. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We've actually mentioned him as somebody who would support. So he most likely will be involved in some capacity. Wait, hold on, Justin. You're on, but we got to fix. We don't see you. How did we do this last time?
Just to add a photo of something.
No, we did it.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we don't have a photo of you.
Because it says you're on the show. Everyone can see and hear you.
See you know, that's a lie.
Okay. Fucking liars. Okay. Oh, there.
Thanks. Oh,
there we go.
Okay. Hello, guys. Nice to see you again, Tal and Adar.
Good to see you, Justin.
Always a pleasure to hear you guys in chat. So I came a little bit late, so I missed the first few minutes, and you were talking about the Al-Aqsa compound and the events that just took place a few days ago. So I was trying to see if I can offer a little insight as someone from Jerusalem and who visited Al-Aqsa a few Ramadans for the night prayers. And I think that it's important to understand that in the prayers that are done at night, after the evening prayers, is called Taraweeh. It's usually they last till about, I want to say 9:30, 10 o'clock, something like that. And you have to understand that a lot of people really want to attend. Let me give it from a religious perspective. So a prayer at Masjid Al-Aqsa is considered like you prayed 500 times, the blessings. And so Masjid Al-Aqsa is being a holy place, is, people want to go there. So why do you have people, Palestinians, that stay there overnight? For two reasons. Ramadan nights are very holy. And people, what they call itikaf. It's a special thing where you pray at night. And it becomes like a social event more than religious, because kids, play football, because, Masjid Al-Aqsa, the whole compound, you have the outside. People have their makluba. And it becomes like a gathering. And the reason why a lot of people stay overnight is because they may have been there from the West Bank. And you understand that people traveling from the West Bank to Jerusalem, even though it's like a few kilometers, it's a whole other world. You get through the checkpoint and, you're tasrih, or if you're there, somehow you got through without one, basically a pass. So what they do is they spend the night there, because if they go home, they may not be able to return the next day. So the idea is we stay overnight because we want to be there for the night prayers as well as the morning prayers, and possibly, to do that a few days and things like that. So this is probably the reason why these people, they barricaded themselves, because for the last few nights, especially during the holiday Pesach, they they want to clear the way maybe for the police for some of the Jewish worshipers to come to visit the site. I know Jewish people don't pray there, but they do come to visit. And there's been, for the last few years, money offered for them to, go and do a sacrifice there, and which would be, against the status quo of what's agreed upon. And so knowing this, I think that's the reason why you saw the reaction of the younger guys trying to say, we're going to barricade ourselves, we're going to get the stones, because they knew that it was going to be a confrontation, because there's a historical pattern to this.
Do you think, with regard to what you were saying about the trying to sacrifice for the Pesach, I know you're talking about it's a small minority group. These aren't individuals who are condoned by the state of Israel or the places. And I was watching in different Telegram channels of multiple being stopped. So I could understand more of the concern if we actually saw that the IDF or the police were actually allowing these individuals on the Temple Mount. But consistently, at least as far as I've seen, they always stop these individuals before they ever get anywhere near the Al-Aqsa compound or the Temple Mount at all. And so my question is, how real are these concerns? Because these individuals, they're much more of a radical small sect, and they are currently stopped by
they are, because I think that sometimes the police force weighs in the fact that this is going to bring about more problems than solutions, or so you do have a police force that tends to appease these people, but not to the extent where it's going to cause more harm. And unfortunately, and here's the thing, okay, I was in Jerusalem in 2016 when they put the metal gates, the metal detectors, and Al-Aqsa, and I don't know if you remember, but people started saying they were praying in the streets, people boycotted going, and all this other stuff. And the reason is that the fear is they do not want the Masjid Al-Aqsa compound to turn into the Abraham Mosque in Hebron. Because after the incident, the massacre that took place there in, I think it was 94. Is it 94 or 92? I don't remember. When Borak Goldstein.
Yeah. No, I'll look it up.
Yeah, and so what happened was,
You're
rather, was it 94?
Wait, no. One second. Why is this?
And I'm looking at the comment here, and Isani is making a comment about kids are not allowed to play, but you have to understand.
1994. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, 1994. Okay, it's the Aqsa Mosque is not just a religious temple where people pray. It's a social event. People go there. There's a platform. You sit outside and you have dinner, and kids are gonna play. It's permissible. There's never been a problem with it. So this is just part of, like, at the Damascus Gate, people, they hang out and stuff like that. So it's a very social thing. It's also a spiritual thing, religious thing. It's just the way people are. But anyway, so what we don't want from Palestinians is that, because I hate to say this, but whenever it comes time to sharing, and if you decide, okay, let's share like we did the Abraham Mosque, or the cave of the Patriarch is what it's called, in the Jews call it. It turned into a military zone with extreme measures that restrict Palestinian access. I mean, you have walls, you have camera systems, you have barriers, and sure, there's security concerns. Absolutely, we're not going to deny that. But this is what the fear is that if this is going to happen, and I mean, me personally, I don't have a problem. Jews can pray on the Temple Mount. I don't have a problem with that. But I'm going to have a problem when Israeli army is the one controlling access to it. And like, for example, I was turned away one time because they said, you're not 45 years old. Go away. And I said, but wait a minute. I'm leaving in a week. Let me go do my prayer and I'm going to leave. Sorry, 45 and older. You have to leave. And this is the type of measures where we don't want. And so these concerns are legit. You know what I'm saying, Tal? So this is that if they are taking responsibility of the police, the Israeli government, they're going to make policies that have much more restrictions on Palestinians and Muslims versus those of the Jewish citizens.
Well, for example, when it comes to the fear and the concerns, one of the measures that was taken after the massacre by Baruch Goldstein in 1994 was that, for example, IDF soldiers can't go into the mosque. Like, you can't into the Tomb of the Patriarchs, the Abraham Mosque, but you can't go in there with weapons anymore. you have to give them to the guards outside. Like, you're not allowed inside at all. So that's the thing is, and yes, there are all these security measures, and yes, they are problematic, but they exist for a reason. It's as in they don't exist in a vacuum. And so when you have the Temple Mount, the Al-Aqsa compound, and it being so volatile because of this fear that it's going to be, taken over, then it leads to violence. But if that fear doesn't exist, as in if it's a free and open site for people of all religions to then pray there, and there isn't these restrictions on both Muslims and both Jews, then wouldn't then that deter more and more violence to occur? Because as you said, of course, some Palestinians are going to be very frustrated that they can't stay overnight, that their permits are going to be taken away from them, and all these different issues. And for example, the Ramadan, the reason that 45 and older is because people that are younger tend to be the ones who are going to be the ones protesting and getting a lot more violent when there's confrontations. That's just how it is. Younger people tend to be that. And so, but that exists because of the current situation. And so if you change the status quo of the Temple Mount, where all three religions were, specifically more Islam and Judaism, both had free access to the Temple Mount with certain restrictions, for example, with not sacrificing on the Temple Mount or stuff like that, wouldn't that lower the amount of security concerns that we would have instead of actually amplifying them?
I think that it wouldn't because, like, for example, let's look at like two incidents that just took place where there was a killing. Someone was killed last week at the Al-Aqsa compound. Mm-hmm. It was the medical student from Romania, Palestinian, from the Beersheba.
Yeah, I know that.
Yes, and yesterday a Palestinian was shot by an Israeli. He wasn't even a police; he was a citizen. Mm-hmm. Now, the police reaction or the military reaction is different. It's just not the same. I mean, if a Palestinian was the shooter, he'd be dead right now. We didn't even be talking about them. He would not have been walked out by the police. Mm-hmm. So, unfortunately, I see what you're saying, but at the same time, the law and the system is just it's not equal, and the response that you're seeing from the Palestinian people is because of desperation, because literally Al-Aqsa compound is the last front of a Palestinian identity of the city. I mean, the city is literally being squeezed. I mean, I've been going back and forth to Jerusalem my whole life, and every year I go back, I feel like the city is disappearing. The Palestinian element of the city is gone. And neighborhoods that were traditionally Palestinians are no longer Palestinian anymore. Restaurants that used to be open all night are gone because they're like, we don't have patrons, we don't have customers anymore. And so this is part of something that's bigger. And it's because people are being squeezed out, and it's done economically, it's done by regulations and restrictions and all kinds of stuff. So it's a bigger picture than just safety and security. Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to like with the concerns of Palestinians, as someone who also lives here, as yourself as Palestinian, mm-hmm. the way that police act, for example, I know that the situation with the Palestinian student who was killed last week, there's a lot of controversy over the case, mm-hmm. Just so people don't know, because supposedly there's no camera footage of the actual incident. There's a lot of conflicting eyewitness testimonies on whether or not he actually reached for anything, or he was actually just trying to protect someone else who he thought was experiencing.
There was a Twitter, I shared it with the group in our Discord server. The same camera footage that doesn't exist for that shooting existed for the kids that were gathering rocks. And it was the same area. I mean, did you see that?
And Manuel, no, this is not talking about Beersheba. This is talking about what occurred on this past week at the Temple Mount Al-Aqsa compound. It's not the same event. But that's, I think, when you're talking about with the growing concerns with Palestinians as Al-Aqsa being a last front, but it also feels like, to an extent, when we talk about the security concerns, and they are very restricting, and I think that at the end of the day, security concerns, while they save lives, they also perpetuate the current system in place. I personally, as I've talked about with you and also in Sulha in general, I think that Israel's had a problem for many years of Israel and the Palestinians have had an issue where it's always been short-term solutions for a long-term issue where Israel has kind of this identity crisis of where it wants to go.
Yes.
But that is an issue in terms of how do we even change that, or how do we lower the amount of restrictions that we have on these different areas of, for example, in I go through security everywhere in the state of Israel, but whenever I go to the temple, to the Western Wall, like everything is taken out of my bag, everything is checked, and I'm just going to look at a very like holy site for the Jewish people. But I mean, it shouldn't. These type of restrictions are insane. About a few months ago, I went to Germany on a trip, and it was I felt very, very uncomfortable. The fact that I didn't have to go through checkpoints or security measures every 5 minutes when I walked into a mall. I remember being there and I was just thinking, like, where's the security guard? Why are there no soldiers around? And I understood like how messed up that is. That's a mentality that I have, that this is a situation that we constantly live in, where we see the military everywhere. We're part of the military, some of us. We have security measures everywhere, and it restricts life. It restricts a lot of different things that we're able to do. But the security measures, again, also don't exist in a vacuum. There's a reason why they exist, and also different reactions. Same for why Palestinians become protesting.
But those also causes don't exist in a vacuum as well. And the solution, what you're saying is, I'm not what you're saying, but what I'm trying to see is that we cannot start and say, okay, everybody, let's just have a big powwow, or what do they call that word? Jews and Muslims go on Temple Mount and everything, because
you know what it's called? That's actually called the Sulha.
The Sulha, yeah. We can't have a gathering right now because the conditions everywhere else are not there. And so if you don't have, for example, if you do not have a period of solving the other issues, then you're kind of like, I want to eat the cake, but I don't want to bake it. And we have to start there. We have to have that before we can say, okay, let's have joint prayers or areas to pray or et cetera, like this. Because considering what's happening in the West Bank, which you mentioned earlier about what Israel's the operations that are going on, the militancy that's growing, considering that for the last, I don't know, say decade or 2 decades, we've gotten absolutely nowhere, and I would even go so far to say backwards. And considering that, these are steps that I don't think you can do right now, because they're going to lead to this type of incidents, because those fires aren't being fought. People want to say, let's talk about the holy spots. Let's talk about this. And the status quo is there for a reason, because it's keeping things under control until everything else gets solved. And if you're going to deal with the Temple Mount, Masjid Al-Aqsa, before you deal with everything else, it's just destined to fail.
Mm-hmm. But then also when you said in terms of the status quo, it's not just to protect things, it's also to stop coming to certain types of solutions. I mean, when one part of the status quo is having different sects of the ultra-Orthodox have control of have the rabbinical courts, being in charge of the marriage, which is actually an adoption from the Ottoman system of that Muslims must be married within the Islamic courts, Christians and the Christians, and Jews and the Jewish courts. And the reason this exists is not because it's about coming together, but it's about coming to a compromise in the current situation, where one side wanted, in the beginning of the state of Israel, wanted a theocratic state based on the Jewish Talmud, and the other wanted a secular democracy that was like the new Israel, that was a new type of Judaism. And so we're still in this fight between ourselves. So also when it comes to the Palestinians and the different status quos, for example, when Israel took over in 1967, it was the first time in 18, 19 years that Jews were allowed to go to these different sites that they weren't allowed to for all these years. They were thrown out by the Jordanian army during the war. And so they were allowed to go back to the Western Wall and pray. And then the Temple Mount became another point of contention, which you're talking about. And yes, I can understand why then the Temple Mount becomes a place of contention for Palestinians, because yes, it is seen for many of them as like the symbol of, like as you said, the last frontier of Palestinians. But also with regard to these restrictions, every time, I mean, what is Israel supposed to do when it comes to, for example, in the last prayers, I think it was yesterday, when you have Hamas or Palestinian militancy banners going up and you have individuals calling for blood on the Temple Mount, it doesn't make anyone want to open the restrictions. It makes them want to even put more and more of a chokehold, which is also not going to be good in the long term.
Yeah, and you know what I have to say about that is that in was it 2020 or 2021 when we had the nationwide riots? 2021, okay, April, right? So
April, May.
May, yeah. You know, it disappoints, and I don't know if you've read my comments and stuff, but you know that I'm extremely adamantly against the Hamas movement because I feel that they're a money-making operation and business, whatever you want to call it, corporation. Okay, but the sad part is that when that event happened, just like this event is happening now, the Palestinian Authority, which is like literally like a drowning man in the middle of a river or lake that's just trying to grasp air to breathe for the next 5 seconds. They're not doing anything else. Partly because of them, and partly because of the funding that's being denied to them, and measures that are their money being held and stuff like that. But that's a whole other subject. But what I'm saying is that these guys are the only ones who are speaking. And it, you know, like if you remember 2021. There was kind of a Sheikh Jarrah was a center of people who were approaching the conflict in a different way. Like it was more like a civil rights thing, anti-violent, more like stand up for human rights, you know, kind of, you know, way. But what these guys do, and sometimes I think it's in some Israeli interests, is they steal the show, and Hamas is so good at that. They have the great publicists. They actually pay people to make videos and send it to them so they can put it on their social media channels and stuff and say, look, this is us. And this is what they do in Al-Aqsa because they are purposely instigating this. And again, I know that this is happening, but the solution is if we do not put out the fires around us, the fire in the center is never going to be put out. This is what's giving these guys fuels in Al-Aqsa. This is what's giving them fuels at these demonstrations, is because the political process is so messed up, not working, that they are the only alternative. Nothing else exists right now for most Palestinians.
Well, that's also, this is something that I remember very specifically saying this in our live stream when we were looking at the riots, where people were saying, you know, Hamas was saying that they were victorious in the conflict there in May. And a lot of people were very confused by it because Israel had a very heavy blow to Gaza and destroyed a lot of their different tunnel networks and stuff like that. And I said that they won because they gained a lot of support after May 2021, because they were the only voices that were standing up, because even if in the long run they were causing a lot more harm to the Palestinian people by firing rockets at Israel and just giving Israel another reason to fire back, they were gaining support.
And not just that, gaining support from people, but they gained support in terms of financial support. The money from Qatar is flowing in like rivers, okay? And Israel knows this.
But also with regard to that, even with Qatar, what they're doing, if Qatar cuts off funding, then the Palestinians in Gaza die, because they will not, because Qatar funds their paychecks. The only reason that Palestinians in Gaza are getting any money is because of the paychecks.
Yeah, but again, this is, but at the same time, they're allowing this to happen with the Qataris and other Gulf and people to support, to strengthen Hamas financially. They're cutting off the PA. They're squeezing the PA, and this is, you know, and I think Lightstone has talked about this a lot in our group, and etc. And this is something that's very critical. So there's two things coming from Israel. They're strengthening Hamas in Gaza while at the same time weakening the PA. And the PA basically, you know, you have cops that haven't been paid for 4 months. They just announced, I think, this month that they're going to pay people 100% salary. This is after, like, I want to say almost more than a year. Teachers, police. If you don't pay your police force, this is a serious problem. You know what's going to happen to those guys with guns if you don't pay them?
Yeah, it already happened.
They're going to join the militants, because the militants, you know.
The individual who carried out one of the attacks in Tel Aviv, he stole his father from his father, and then the father also like praised him afterwards. Like they're people within the PA, different intelligence officers, police officers, they were praising attacks against civilians
Yeah.
directly after, and like against the certain PA narrative.
Yes, and this is
Yeah,
why it's a
guys,
mistake.
real quick, Justin, real quick. I do got to hop off, but feel free to continue the stream as long as you
Thanks,
want.
Adar.
Add people on.
Yeah, and we're
It's
trying to get
for you
people
all
for the
to
100.
decide.
It's a very good initiative. I think I lined up like 2 people so far.
Oh, amazing.
Did you sign up yet?
I'm thinking about it.
Oh, you see,
I'll talk to you
You
about
could,
it. I have something.
you can remain anonymous for it if you'd like.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to just thank you both because it's, as you know, while I'm busy with this project, Grateful Giraffes, it's so hard for me to stay active.
Are you in Los
and,
Angeles now?
Yeah, I'm still here for another
Okay.
few months.
Okay. I'm up in the north.
Oh, come visit. Come down for
Los
a little
Angeles.
visit.
Northern California people don't like Los Angeles.
Venice is different. It's a different city.
Okay.
LA is like many different cities in one. But yeah, I'd love to meet you in person. And
Yeah,
just
that'd be
thank you
cool.
both for taking the lead here. I would not be able to do these streams without your support. So thank you, and
Thanks.
hopefully we have.
appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll leave it with one note. I hope we have de-escalation soon, but even if we de-escalate, the status quo will always continue to produce more violence. So de-escalation is not enough because we'll be back in this situation in a few months or a few years.
Absolutely.
We need real change, real lasting change, and that will require bold
Amen.
moves and bold leadership on both sides. So hoping for that. And with that, I'm signing off. Thank you, guys.
Take care, bro. Take care. Yeah. Well, I was gonna tell him I'm we should be positive. I see that a lot of what's happening, and this is another. Oh, am I muted? No.
No, you're good.
Oh, okay, good. I was gonna say that what I'm hoping that doesn't happen, because I think things were moving actually a little better. The demonstrations in Israel, they started to focus both on not only just the reforms in the right-wing government, but also the occupation. We saw more and more this addressing this concern. And I think that this momentum needs to continue. And I'm hoping that this escalation, because what I fear is happening, and I hate to say this, it's probably what's going to happen, is that this escalation and any escalations that you were talking about in terms of what the Israeli military might do, if we have a repeat of the 2002, then I think what's going to happen is it's going to basically silence this reform. Not silence it, but maybe kind of like quiet it a little bit. Because
I think
because security rallies Israelis. It rallies them together. When you have like a conflict, like if we have an armed conflict in the West Bank, like 2002, I think that really is going to hurt the people who are fighting reforms.
No, definitely. It would rally everyone against a common goal, because that's what war does. It's rallies people against a perceived sense of needing to survive and stuff like that. And that's definitely something. I think also when it comes to like where we move forward, I think that we already know that the Palestinian Authority has lost all of its legitimacy with the Palestinian people.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever heard of one Palestinian ever talk about the Palestinian Authority in a good light ever, which is surprising because usually people have very different opinions in this conflict, but not with that. It seems very like
especially among the youth, because you have to understand something, that if you lived in the territories before the 1990s and the Intifada, and remember what the West Bank was like before the Palestinian Authority came, I'm one of the people who say, you know what, life in Ramallah is 100 times better than what it used to be back in the 80s and 90s. But I can't say that to a 24-year-old, 25-year-old, because he only knows life after that. He doesn't remember before.
Isn't that one of the reasons that led to the first Intifada, is that Palestinians that were suddenly under the Israeli military control in 1967, they had a much better life than under Jordanian control. Israel had a policy essentially called, I've heard it multiple times by Israeli officers, called the soft occupation, where it was essentially about they built hospitals, they built schools for Palestinians, they built like a ton of infrastructure, And so it was much better for the first generation. But then once a new generation came into light in the 80s and the economy collapsed, everything went really bad.
It wasn't just that. I think it was also that it was a recovery period, because you have to understand that the Jordanians really did suppress the Palestinians and even the Palestinian identity. They essentially tried to eradicate it. I mean, just as much, because it was a threat to them. And I think what you also had is, you had the battles going on, what happened in Beirut, in Lebanon, and things, and it kind of like the sense of like, okay, yeah, things did get better, but the occupation also gave us sort of a center. You know what I'm saying? Because before we were under Egyptian rule, we were under Jordanian rule, we were under refugees in different parts of the world, or Palestinians that lived in Israel. So I think that it kind of centralized everything, and I think that's more of the reason that it just took for time for that to develop and turn into resistance. But the thing is that if you look at, like, in the 1980s, when you were traveling in the West Bank, like, I mean, going to, like, I went to Ramallah, I think it was as a kid. How old was I? Let's see, hold on a second. I remember going to Ramallah before the Palestinian Authority came, and I hated it. Ramallah was chaotic. The roads, the taxis parked in the middle of the street, the parking situation. I mean, it was literally like you need to like fight to cross the street. And the Palestinian Authority brought order to Ramallah. They actually brought, nicer roads. They brought an education system. The healthcare system is not the best in the world. Absolutely. I'm not going to sit here and say they did great, but you saw what was a foundation of a nation. And that was lacking, very much lacking in the West Bank. There was some improvements made, and Israel did it, of course, for their interest. And it was a quiet occupation, in the sense that they were very passive people. There wasn't, this. But the thing is, these type of things don't last, because they don't solve the overall problem. And maybe it was the economy that made this, kind of like spill over, I should say. Is that the word that I'm looking for?
What did you say? Sorry.
Like I said, like when you said that it was when the economy collapsed, but
well, that's the thing. It's not that the
it
economy is what leads to it, but it's essentially there's a match, and that's what lit it. But,
exactly. But the thing is, these problems were there.
Yeah, of course.
And they were contained, and it wasn't to say that the situation was like wow, happy, jolly, but it was like you said. Sometimes it takes that flame, because of people's expectations. And remember, when people lives improve, they get more expectations. And if those expectations aren't met, then of course they revolt. That's how revolutions start. Most revolutions, if you look at them, they start with expectations. People get better, and they expect more.
Yeah. Well, that's also another issue. When it comes to the Israeli leadership, is also like very divided into two. But there's one leadership. Like, we have one prime minister currently in power who represents the Israeli people, and that's Netanyahu. With the Palestinians, there isn't that.
No,
you have Gaza, the West Bank. You have Israeli Arabs who don't all feel any connection to the state of Israel. Then you have diaspora Palestinians, and I personally categorize. Tell me if this feels off. I categorize diaspora Palestinians as those in the diaspora, and then those who are on the borders of Israel in the refugee camps. And then so you essentially have 5 different groups with varying different opinions and different needs and wants. You have those who are living within the border countries who don't have equal rights, who are not considered, who cannot get citizenship, like in Lebanon, who are in refugee camps till this day. You have diaspora that simply want to come to Israel, and even visiting sometimes can be an issue, because Israel has a very long line tendency to not allow them to travel here, Palestinians, if they have any connection. Then and
even with U.S. citizenship, which is the reason why I try to keep a low key, because I get, I have family that was turned away with U.S. citizenship, that are turned away at the airport because of this.
Yeah. So you have the concerns of diaspora is more about being able to come to the land. You have it's about coming back to the land. Then you have refugee camps, which is about equal rights and citizenship, even within the own Arab lands, which they're oppressed by the like Lebanon, Syria, Jordan less Egypt. Then you have West Bank, which is under a military control. You have Gaza, which is also kind of like in between Hamas and Israel, trying to just live day-to-day lives. And then you have Israeli Arabs who have this very, very disputed connection with the state of Israel, because everything about the state of Israel is Jewish, and they're not Jewish, and so where's their connection and where's their loyalty to? And so you have 5 different concerns,
and it's not just different
no
concerns.
centralized leadership.
It's not just different concerns; it's different realities. Like a Palestinian that lives in Jerusalem versus a Palestinian. Like I was listening to a friend of mine. He met with a Palestinian from the West Bank, a Palestinian from Haifa, and a Palestinian from Jerusalem, and they live in 3 different realities. And let me go for you're looking at it from a political perspective. Now let's look at it from a social perspective. I can tell you people who went to a university who fell in love and could not get married because one was West Bank and one was Jerusalem. And because it would require you to change your status, where the person from Jerusalem would have to give up his residency of Jerusalem and take Palestinian Authority citizenship, lose right to go live in his house. And the same thing applies to if a person from, say, Haifa, a Palestinian, was to fall in love with a woman from Gaza, and it's just complicated. Or like I have many relatives, they're married to Palestinians from Jordan, who have, it's it's crazy. It's and even in my situation, I am married, and my wife has a Palestinian passport, but I'm from a Jerusalem family. And it created, so from a social and family thing, it's a nightmare, because literally it's to the point right now where certain parents will not permit or will tell their kids, you're not allowed to marry that girl or that guy because they're from the West Bank, not because we want to discriminate against them, but because you're going to create a problem of your children. Where are your children going to live? How are you going to live together? How are you going to come to us and live in here and stuff? It's a mess, man. And you're right, where it's totally decentralized, because the Palestinians are so fragmented, not just their politics, their leadership, but their very reality is fragmented. Like when I go visit my friends who live in the 48 territories, it's like we're all Palestinians, but man, it's a different reality. They live in a different dimension, literally.
Mm-hmm. And so that's the thing. So you have these different groups, and there's no centralized leadership, because also another thing that can happen is that you can have, for example, Lapid, who was, in my opinion, a lot better in terms of trying to have relations with Palestinians and stuff like that in his tenure. And so he could be advancing, let's just say he starts meeting with Abu Mazen, talks about lifting restrictions, and then suddenly Hamas attacks from the side, Hezbollah attacks from the north. And so there's also like, who do we trust? Because even if we trust one group, we have to deal with everyone else. Where when Palestinians have to deal with Israel, they have to deal with one cohesive government. Even if the government's in fractions of itself, at the end of the day, there's one army, there's one police force, there's one government. And so it also makes a lot of issues in terms of even being able to sit down at a table. Who am I sitting at the table with?
Yeah. And at the same time, it is not also like you say 100%, because I'm going to tell you why. Because if you remember, I don't think you would remember. Were you 2020? Were you around? No, 2000? Were you around? No, you're
2000.
No, were you a baby? Okay.
I was
Anyways,
a baby.
I remember 2000, after the Camp David between Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. They didn't come to an agreement. But what's important is that later they met in Taba, and the Taba Accords were actually something that was plausible. And I said, hey, this is going to work. And even Ehud Barak said, and I remember, I am declaring a Jerusalem that's going to be bigger than the times of Solomon. Like, because, he had a plan and laid out Jerusalem partitioned and etc. And what happened? A new Israeli government under the leadership of Ariel Sharon came, and he scrapped it. So in a sense, from the Palestinian side, the Israeli is not necessarily you're dealing with one leader, because here's the thing. We might come up with an agreement and everything goes fine. And guess what? Somebody else comes to power and says, forget everything. And this has happened. It happened with Olmert. Olmert's plan, people say, not to cut you off, sorry, but they say that it was rejected by Abu Mazen. Abu Mazen, in a sense, did reject it, but because it was offered as this is the solution rather than a negotiation. But what could have happened is it could have led to more negotiation, more discussion, a counter proposal, and then later, but Olmert had his legal problems, he had to leave, and you had a new leadership. So it happens on that side as well.
Yeah, no, it's also, as you said, for example, when Mayal Michaeli was changed, Mayal Michaeli, who is the Minister of Transportation, just to understand like how I understand your concern, because like when she left the government, suddenly the new I just forgot her name for a second, but the new Minister of Transportation wanted to scrap and do reforms to everything that she had proposed earlier. And so it's also a big issue. That's also an issue with democracies in general, where they have this switch sometimes between governments, and especially in the Israeli government, where you have sometimes very, very different sides in the coalition and the opposition, where they can have totally opposite perspectives. And so, yeah, it's also an issue that there's no cohesive leadership for long term. Sometimes the leadership says one thing, does another. We saw this both from the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. We saw this from the Palestinian side with, for example, during the Oslo Accords. There were still attacks against civilians by different Palestinian militant groups. Also, a lot of conspiracy, how much Yasser Arafat actually knew about these different attacks. And then you had the Israeli side that kept on building settlements, even though they weren't supposed to be building. Even though they weren't supposed to be building settlements during the Accords, because they were trying to advance two different missions. They were trying to essentially finish the conflict with the Palestinians, but also create a much more complete Israel with the entire.
And the problem is that, and again, I don't think that Yasser Arafat wanted the militants or this like that. It was more like an appeasement, because you have to understand. I mean, I remember Ariel Sharon during Oslo, he told the settler groups, grab every mountaintop, build like crazy. He said, grab every mountaintop and build like crazy, because he knew, and it was almost like an appeasement. And so that's the thing, is that there really needs to be a strong resolve, both from the Palestinian side and from the Israeli side, to stand up against these people who are sabotaging this process, because this process has been sabotaged every time we get close or every time we move forward. And we, both of us, we let these people win. They're winning. The extremists are winning, because all they have to do, fire 4 missiles or 40 missiles or build a settlement, and everything's over. Announce new settlements, or 30,000, and this is the reason why they do it, because they know that they're going to sabotage the process and everything is going to continue as is. And we let them win.
I remember, this was years ago, but there's a peace group called, what was it called? It's about like Palestinian and Israeli youth together in Jerusalem. Kids for Peace, I think it's called.
Okay.
And I remember speaking with them. This is years ago, like when I was like 17, 18. And I remember we asked them and this is a group that's very cohesive. They all look like best friends, everything. And we asked them, for example, like, what do you do when there's like times of conflict and things get really bad? And they said it's really hard for the group to be together.
Yeah.
And this is a group, and these are groups that are kids that are constantly together, and they look like they're best friends. And the second the conflict heats up, everything tears apart. And it's also very hard. I remember I've been working on this type of stuff, and I remember I was in Tel Aviv during the terror attack in Tel Aviv with my fiance, like just after our engagement. We were next to where the terror attack happened, and we were fleeing from the area. And I remember the amount of, like, when I saw the individuals that had been murdered that night, and like the amount of anger that I had inside of me. And you start thinking to yourself, what's the point of all this? Screw this. There's no point for peace anymore. Yeah. And this anger that you have inside of you from this moment that hits you directly. And thankfully I got out of that. But many don't. And then it's also very hard to reason with them, because what are you reasoning with? Like, to them, it's like, I need to save my people. I need to save my family, my loved ones. I can't think about the other side right now. And that's what constantly happens. It's why whenever there's a attack against Israeli civilians, the Palestinians say, well, what about all the Palestinians that were just killed? And then whenever there's an attack against Palestinians, the Israelis are, what about all of our people? And it's this constant cycle of trauma and pain that each side feel. And they don't want to, because they feel that if they leave room to feel for the other side and empathize, then they're delegitimizing their own side by doing that.
This is something that you get better at, I think, when you get older. I think when you're younger, it's hard. I know when I was in my teens and 20s, it was very hard. Like if I saw like a massacre or something, I mean, my immediate reply was like, F them, let's kill them all. And I think that when you become more rational And like I have a friend who I'm hoping he was going to be one of the 100s. He works in an organization, Roots. I've talked about Roots many times.
Yeah, I know it's. I work
Yeah,
with them.
and one of the questions, if you're going to be the one who interviews him, I want you to ask him is, how does he do it? He lives in Bethlehem. He lives under occupation. Yet when Hawara happened, he joined them and went to Hawara and stood with Jews in Hawara there. And that's one of the things. It's like, how do you do it, man? After these crazy things happen, that you continue. And I think that you have to. There's two things you can do. One, you can get angry and you can fight and just say forget everything. But which is easy for the Israelis because easier, I should say, for the Israelis because you can still live in good life in Tel Aviv and everything is nice. It's a little harder for the Palestinians because you're still going to live under occupation. But
Mhm.
at the same time, even me as a Palestinian who has great restrictions placed upon me, I have to say we got to double down. We got to double down on them, not for our sake, but for the sake of the generations that are going to come after. Like I have kids. I don't want my kids to live and see what we see. So we have to double down because the alternative is worse. I mean, literally, we're not going to have a perfect situation. This is what I tell people all the time. We're always going to have these extremists. We're always going to have people who are going to attack. Where terrorism is not going to go away. Radicalism is never going to go away. Either we make the world better and live with these realities, or continue living terrible and deal with those realities. So, I mean, it's really a simple solution. You know?
It's simple. Naive. Simple. I don't know about that. But I think it is about encouraging
But
discussions. I remember.
but did you
Yeah.
hear what Adar said? He said that I hope we don't. I hope he said I hope that things de-escalate. But I don't want to paraphrase him wrong, but he basically that it's a roller coaster ride. What we see happening now is something that happens every few months because it's the status quo. It's the current situation, and it's like, aren't you guys tired? It's like going to the Friday the 13th film. When you've seen one of them, you've seen all of them. It's like the same movie, and it's like, come on, let's get into a different series or something because it's that roller coaster ride that he just said. Yeah, we'll de-escalate, things will get back to quiet, and everything will be fine for a little bit, and then one little thing's gonna happen, and all hell's gonna break loose. And this is what I'm saying. So in a way, that's why I'm saying it's simple. I'm not saying it's simple to do it, but the choice is simple. Do you want the status quo,
Mhm.
which is going to be every few months people getting killed, people getting this and escalations, or move forward? Let's do something and maybe sometimes face these things because I think they will be reduced if people's lives improve.
No, I think there's also like the individual level and then there's a collective. I personally joined Sulha and do this type of stuff and meet with Palestinians and Israelis to try to be a part of those individuals to try to move forward. Also in my private life of the type of career paths that I'm going on, I'm trying to do that as well. And I don't think it's not an easy path to take because also everyone's at a different stage of understanding a narrative or understanding the other side.
Yeah.
I always notice that whenever I start a conversation with either an Israeli or a Palestinian, I sometimes feel like I have to explain myself for 40 minutes to explain a very simple point because we categorize people by certain words that they say. So if you say that what happened in Hawara against Jews was bad, it's like, oh, so you hate Palestinians and you think that Palestinians should all die? And no. And or if I think that what happened against Palestinians in Temple Man was horrible, then now you don't. Now you. Oh, so you support the Jews and you all stuff like that. And it's this constant thing where we're always at like a different stage of understanding one another, and then we're not on the same playing
Yeah.
field at all, which is also a big issue. I noticed that like you can't. It was something that was very like hard to do when I first started doing Sulha and stuff like that. That I felt that whenever I had to explain any concept, no matter what it was, I had to then explain my entire backstory, who I was, where I'm from, how I got to this point in my life, how I got to this mindset, in order to explain why I have this certain opinion and it means this and not this, which is very hard to do.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that opened my eyes the most was when I started studying language. Because when you start to study language, culture, and you talk to people like everyday people, I don't know. I think it kind of opens your eyes a little bit more. But again, it can't be just that. It's not enough to have dialogue. It's not enough just to learn about each other. There has to be something, because here's the thing. Like if I'm, I'm not living now in any occupied territories. I'm living in the U.S. But if I was in the occupied territories now and not able to leave, and we meet every month and we talk and we have great discussions like this, and then you go back to your life and I go back to my life, it's I don't know, those things. It's not sustainable, to be honest with you. It
It's
has to.
hard.
Yeah.
It's exactly. It's why, for example, if I'm very aware that if I go to Jews that are currently living in near Hawara or living in West Bank or in different settlements, they're going to have much more radical opinions than I do, and much more
Yeah.
usually violent opinions, because that's the day-to-day life that they live in. They're living in a war zone, like day-to-day life.
Yeah.
It's why people in Sderot, people who live on the fence with Gaza, have a lot more violent groups. Why people in Gaza have a lot more violent groups. And so that's another issue, is that there's different amounts of, now the word's been completely destroyed, but essentially the type of privilege of I'm living in a certain way of life that I don't have these certain concerns. Because if I had that, when I fled the scene of a terror attack that happened next to me, and the anger and the hatred that I felt, if I had to deal with that every single week or every single day, I don't know if I'd ever be able to get out of it and then look beyond my emotional perspective on things. And that's something that's also has to take into effect. It's like, of course, people are going to be looking at the other side like this, because this is their daily life. This is what they see. This is their reality. And it's nothing wrong. It's no different than your reality. It's simply they're in a certain situation that you're not in. And so they look at you like you're a crazy person.
Yeah. No, definitely. Okay.
And we're gonna
let's
sum up, but wrap up. I'm gonna say one thing. I think Justin, you've seen this on the channel. So I'm also a collector. I like collecting things.
Oh, the coins, right?
Also the coins. I collect things mainly from.
I have to thank you, by the way.
Yeah.
Because when I found that, remember I showed you that Iraqi dinar, the 20 dinar.
Yeah.
Well, it was in an old wallet, and somehow there was $400 bills, $400 bills in that same wallet that I didn't know about. So because you showed me your coin, I went and found that Iraqi dinar that I had hidden in this old wallet, and I found that I must have stashed that money away and said, "Hey, for some rainy day." So I owe you.
Hey, if you want me to give you my pay box, I mean, you're welcome to.
Well,
say
I already spent it, but anyways, but go ahead. I'm like, cool. I found $400. So anyways, I thought that was funny. I was going to tell you about that. Nice.
And so I my degree in that I'm finishing up now, my first degree is political science. I'm very interested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in general, and specifically I collect things from the Mandate of Palestine, so from 1920 to 1919, 1921 to 1948. I have birth certificates, land deeds, coins. I have, for example, in the honor of Pesach, I'll show this. This is the only thing I'll show now. This is a Haggadah. It's a Jewish prayer book for Haggadah. It's a Haggadah for Pesach that we read on the Seder night. And it is from 1936. And awesome. If you read, let me find the...
I see it right there.
Wait, here you go. And if you... Where is it? Printed it.
Okay, it says printed in... Hold on.
Eretz
Israel. Okay, Palestine. Oh, interesting. Okay.
And then you also have the date of when it was signed in copyright 1936, which is also pretty significant because 1936 was the year of the Arab Revolt.
The year of Arab Revolt, exactly.
So a significant year. So I have a lot of different things like this, and so if you guys want, I can do. I'll take like proper photos of all of them and then show them on a live stream. All the different things that I've collected.
I have a passport from 1935.
So you should also come on, and we'll look at different things.
My great grandmother's passport. She used it to go to pilgrimage to Mecca, and it was issued to her. And it says British Palestine, by the way, on it.
Really? Yeah. That's I also have a birth certificate where the mother's nationality is Palestinian because that's what it was back then. That's how they defined it. A Jewish mother. I forgot. I think her name was Eve. I'm not sure. I have it in the folder. But anyways, thank you all for being here. It was a really lively discussion also in the comments. It was really interesting to follow along as we were discussing. Justin, it's always great to see you.
Thank you so much again.
see you, hear you. It's good to hear you.
Good. Yeah.
And we will have another live stream soon going
And
over.
and by the way, Hag Sameach, or happy
And-
Passover and
and
holidays.
Ramadan Kareem.
Thank you.
Awesome. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
And good morning.